When you hear the name Geronimo, it conjures this image of a legend, right? A symbol of pure, fierce resistance. But that's the legend. Behind it was a man, a husband, a father. So today we're going to push the myths aside and hear his story, from his own words, to really understand the devastating tragedy that created the warrior.
And we're going to start right here, with Geronimo's own account of his life before the war. Listen how he talks about his love for his wife, Alope, and their children. These are not the words of a hardened killer. They're the words of a man living a life of peace, a world filled with the simple joys of family, a world he was about to lose forever.
So who exactly was he before he became Geronimo? Well, he was born Goclaye, all the way back in 1829. He was a member of the Bedonkohe Apaches, and his life was what you might call traditional. It was shaped by the seasons, by the land, farming down in the valleys, hunting on the prairies, and raising his family up in the mountains of what we now call Arizona.
And his path into manhood was pretty typical for his people. At 17, he proved himself and earned his spot in the Council of Warriors, a huge moment of pride. But the real joy, the way he tells it, was finally getting to marry Alope. And for the next decade or so, he just lived. He built a home, he had a family. This whole period, right up to 1858, was defined by contentment, not by conflict.
Okay, so it's the summer of 1858. The tribe is at peace with its neighbors, so they decide to make a journey south into Old Mexico, to a town they called Casquille. Now, this is really important to understand. This wasn't a raid. This was a peaceful trading mission. It was something they did all the time when there was a truce. They had absolutely no reason to think anything was wrong.
And right here, this is where everything changes. This is the moment Geronimo's life pivots on a dime. That peaceful trading trip becomes a scene of just unimaginable horror. It's an event that would not only shatter his world, but would end up echoing through the rest of American history.
The way it happened is just chilling. The Apache men, trusting the truce was solid, went into town to trade for the day. They left their families, the women, the children, all their supplies, back at camp with just a small guard. But while they were gone, Mexican soldiers from a different town launched a surprise attack on that completely defenseless camp. When the Apache warriors headed back that afternoon, they weren't greeted by their families. They were met by a few terrified survivors who had the worst news you could possibly imagine.
These are the words that define the rest of his life. He goes back to the camp, and his entire world is just gone. His mother, his wife Alope, and his 3 little kids, all of them dead. The sheer bluntness of this sentence from his autobiography, it just hits you with a depth of pain that's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
The shock and grief of a moment like that could have just shattered any person. And it did break him. But for Goclaye, it was like a crucible. The pain didn't just break him apart, it forged him into something new.
And his first reaction wasn't even rage, it was nothing. Emptiness. He describes just standing there by the river, completely numb. His life's entire purpose had been wiped out in a single afternoon. In his own words, he had no purpose left.
And in that absolute void, a new, terrible purpose started to grow. That despair didn't last. As the numbness started to fade, it was replaced by one single, all-consuming drive: revenge.
His transformation was sealed with this ritual of destruction. He burned his own home, the teepee that Alope had decorated. He burned his children's little toys. This was more than just a custom. It was a deeply symbolic act. He was cutting all ties to the man he used to be. He was literally incinerating his own past to make way for a future that would be fueled by nothing but vengeance. He goes from being this private man, just swallowed by his grief, to a public leader demanding war. He went to the other Apache tribes, and he didn't go as a chief, but as a man who had been wronged more than anyone. This quote, this is his direct appeal. It's not really a request. It's a declaration of what he's going to do and a challenge for anyone brave enough to join him.
And almost a year later, his call was answered. The Apache tribes came together, united for one single reason: to avenge the massacre at Casquille. And the man who had lost everything was about to lead them all.
3 Apache tribes answered his call. They united under some of the most powerful chiefs around: Mungus, Colorado, Cochise, and Webb. This was a huge deal, this unification, and it was brought together by the sheer power of his personal loss and his unwavering vow for retribution. Now this is a really remarkable detail.
Goklayé, he wasn't a chief. He was a warrior, but not a chief by birthright. But in the council they held before the battle, the other chiefs, even the great Cochise, they all agreed. They gave him the honor of leading the fight. Their logic was simple. His right to vengeance was the greatest, so he should be the one to direct it.
So as he leads the charge against the very same Mexican soldiers who did this to him, he said his mind was just filled with memories of his family. Every single move was fueled by that loss. This wasn't a fight for land or for supplies. For him, this was deeply, violently personal. He fought, as he put it, with fury. The battle raged for 2 hours. It was brutal, it was bloody, and as it all reached a fever pitch, he finds himself with just 3 other warriors, totally surrounded by the dead and dying, right in the center of the chaos.
They had nothing left. Their arrows were gone, their spears were shattered. It came down to the most primal kind of combat you can imagine. This wasn't war from a distance anymore. This was hand-to-hand, a desperate struggle for survival and vengeance with nothing but their knives.
And right in the middle of that chaos, a Mexican soldier on horseback cuts down one of his last companions. Goklayé instantly turns on the soldier, fights him hand-to-hand, kills him with his knife, and stands up from the struggle holding the dead man's saber.
And with that one final act, the battle was over. The field was theirs. He describes the sound of the Apache war cry just echoing over the bodies of the dead. It was the sound of vengeance finally delivered.
And it's on that bloody field that a legend is born. The Mexican soldiers, terrified, seeing his fury, started crying out his name, Geronimo. Maybe they were praying to Saint Jerome, we don't know for sure, but the name stuck. The man who was Goklayé died with his family at Casquié. The man who walked off that battlefield was Geronimo. And the Apaches, they made him their war chief.
But here's the thing. This victory, this incredible moment of vengeance, it wasn't an ending, not even close. It was a beginning. It set in motion a chain of events that would define him and the American Southwest for decades.
See, getting revenge didn't bring him peace. It just solidified his new identity. The fight for his family turned into a permanent state of war. That one tragic day at Casquié didn't just cause one battle. It lit a fire that would burn for the next 30 years. He would lead raids deep into Mexico, relentlessly hunting anyone he held responsible. And later, as America pushed west, his fight turned against the U.S. Army, where he led a tiny band of guerrilla warriors in an impossible resistance that made him the most feared and the most famous Apache in history. And that really leaves us with a heavy question, doesn't it? Geronimo got the revenge he wanted. He defeated the soldiers who murdered his family, and he became a great war chief. But in doing so, he locked himself and his people into this endless cycle of violence. It makes you wonder, when a person's life is reforged by trauma and vengeance, is it ever possible to find peace? Or is the victory on the battlefield just the beginning of a much longer and much lonelier war inside?